Yo, this is the Scarcity Studios YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. And our sponsors at Alpha Claims and Hire Birmingham, the leading and best accident management company. Get a replacement car anywhere in 1 hour. On the 3rd of September 2016, Philip Finnegan's body was found in Rahin Woods in County Kildare. He had been stabbed multiple times, beheaded, and attempts were made to burn his body. He died while wearing a bulletproof vest as well. The Garda launched a murder investigation after it was believed the 24-year-old was last seen on August the 10th the same year. He had links to organised crime and the Garda believed that he could have been killed in a row over money. Mr Finnegan was from Mary Aikenhead House in Dublin 8 and was aware that his life was in danger. He wore a bulletproof vest every single day and he was still wearing the vest when his body was found. He was involved in serious organised crime and had been attacked and shot a number of times before. He had also been charged with and later acquitted of firearm charges after a gun was found in his home. The police focused their attention on trying to locate the murder weapon and sealed off the woods for an in-depth search. The Garda then went on to start to think that Mr Finnegan may have been killed by people that he knew. In a previous attempt on his life in 2013, he was shot at in Lower Basin Street but survived. And he also had an altercation in a fast food restaurant in the Dublin city centre. The Assistant State Pathologist, Margaret Bolster, told the prosecution in the court case for his murder that she conducted a post-mortem on the remains on September the 4th, 2016. The witness that found the body was a dog walker and she discovered the body in Rahin Woods at 1:10 in the afternoon on September the 3rd. She saw a leg protruding from some earth, and the pathologist said that the bones were practically defleshed and the body was in the fetal position and both knees were curled up to his chest and bent back down. During the post-mortem, the pathologist said that the deceased's body was covered in the protective vest and his right arm was encased in a blue t-shirt that had been mounted to the vest during attempts to try to discard the body. And the front part of the pelvis had been cut through and large amounts of the buttocks were missing. The head was separated from the neck bone at the 4th vertebrae, the doctor said, and added anything sharp could have been used. The witness testified that a small piece of bone had been chipped away from the right side of the victim's jaw, and the entire anterior abdominal wall was not present due to decomposition. There was also evidence of extensive burning to the upper left shoulder and the palm of the left hand, along the left upper arm and the left forearm. And referring to the decomposition of the body, Dr. Bolster said that the breakdown of the tissue symbolises that predators like rats and foxes had also begun to eat away at the body. The Garda investigation led to the arrest of Stephen Penrose, who was a short-term friend of the deceased Mr Finnegan. Stephen Penrose was the son of a former Garda himself, and after the police believed they had enough evidence, they charged Stephen Penrose with the murder of Philip Finnegan. During the trial, Stephen's own father gave evidence in the case in relation to the time before the murder. The father of Stephen Penrose said in court that Mr Finnegan was a very nice man and very friendly. Paul Penrose said in his son's murder trial that Stephen and Philip had been chatting away in the car as if they'd knew each other their whole life, 2 days before Mr Finnegan was killed. His father told the prosecution that he dropped his son Stephen to a shopping centre at around 1 PM on August the 8th because his son wanted to go to a phone shop. When Stephen returned to the car, he had 2 phones with him and there was not in packets. Mr Penrose then drove his son to meet a friend in Poole Tarlington and the friend turned up in a blue Alfa Romeo. His father said that Stephen asked him if he had £500 to buy a car and he didn't have 500 on him, but he gave him £300. Stephen bought the car and him and his son drove back in convoy to Dublin. Stephen's father told the jury that he was aware that his son had called a friend, who was called Philip Finnegan, the victim. Mr Penrose described seeing his son and Mr Finnegan embrace each other in a big hug at the front door. Stephen went into Mr Finnegan's house for around 30 minutes. The accused got into the front of the car and Mr Finnegan was in the back. The witness said they drove to McDonald's and jumped out of the car, and the following day Mr Penrose said that he'd got a call from his son, Stephen, and he sounded a little bit distressed. But eventually Stephen rang him and told him to go home. On August the 10th, his father said he got a call from a paramedic to say that Stephen had been stabbed and that he'd lost a lot of blood and needed clothes. Stephen's dad told the court he went to the shopping centre and got his son some clothes and shoes, and then they went to the hospital on the same night. Stephen's arm was in a sling and he told him that he'd been attacked and that a couple of fellas had jumped him and stabbed him. The day after, his son wanted him to move the car to a different location. Stephen's father said to the court that there was blood marks all over the car when he arrived, and his son began wiping them with tissue and water. He assumed that it was his son's own blood and was wiping the blood from the outside and not the inside. He said Stephen parked the car in another location before his dad drove his son back to Connolly Hospital. Mr Penrose said that Stephen rang him on August the 12th to tell him that the Gardaí had been to see him inside the hospital, and his son drove to Affy to see a friend, and on the way back he checked the car in Kilcock. Stephen's dad then brought him to a hardware store to buy materials to clean the blood from the outside of the car. But when they returned to the car, there was police near it, and he said, "I got some impression that he didn't want to go near the car, and he told me to keep on driving, and we carried on to Affy." He said Stephen was on the phone constantly during the journey, but he said they didn't end up going to Affy and they went to meet somebody else. His father then recalls that later on in the day when he got home, he saw a press conference on the TV and saw that it was about Philip Finnegan. He said he was shocked. He said, "That was the fella that was in my back seat." And when Stephen rang his dad, he told his son about the press release in relation to Philip. Mr Penrose said, "This morning Stephen rang me. He could tell that he wasn't in a good mood and he asked me if I was okay. I told him that I saw the press release about Philip. I told him that he'd been missing since Wednesday. And Stephen told me that Philip was with him on Wednesday and he was texting and ringing a fella to meet him on the Wednesday. They met some fella, but he didn't say where. And he said that Philip was in some sort of argument with the guy on the phone when they met him. And Philip got out of the car and one of them stabbed him in the arm." Stephen said that he just drove off and left Philip there. This is the first time that Stephen made up an excuse for what had happened to Philip and also put himself at the scene. During the trial, it was revealed that Stephen had previously already stood trial for a murder, and this was the second one in relation to the drugs trade. They accused him of murdering his friend Philip Finnegan, who had been missing for 3 weeks, and his decapitated remains had been found in the shallow grave. 12 jurors took 5 hours and 46 minutes to unanimously find Penrose guilty of the murder. And they said that he lied throughout the investigation and tried to move the police away from the Woods. In 2010, Stephen had stood trial and been found not guilty of murder but guilty of manslaughter after he admitted to stabbing a man called David Sharkey, who was 28 years old, in Navan. This was in a row over drugs, and he put the body of the man in the car, but he was discovered by the police shortly after, and this resulted in him getting a manslaughter charge and not murder. Penrose's defence in the 2010 murder trial was that he only planned to rob heroin from Mr Sharkey. Stephen Penrose from Coolock in Dublin pled not guilty to murdering Mr Finnegan, and he also chose to represent himself after dispensing of 2 legal teams during the trial. This gave him the opportunity to cross-examine Philip Finnegan's mother, Angela. And he also considered bringing forward Brian Rattican to give evidence, which was his main defence, was that so many people wanted Finnegan dead that it couldn't have been him and that he was actually set up. Brian Rattican was the leader of a gang who was once associated to Liam Byrne. Himself and Fat Freddie Thompson had gone to war with each other in the years that Liam Byrne was away. Philip Finnegan was associated to Rattican, who was also known as King Rat. There were several murders that was connected to the feud that had started in the year 2000, and the first victim of the feud was Declan Gavin. He was murdered in 2001 and stabbed outside Abracadabra fast food restaurant in Crumlin. The next person that was killed was Joseph Rattican, Brian's brother. He was shot dead on Cooley Road in 2002. And in 2003, Brian Rattican was arrested for shooting at the Gardai in a patrol car as they pursued him through the city. Brian was handed a 13-year prison sentence for this incident, but he continued to control the gang from inside his prison cell. Paul Warren, 24 years old, was a suspect in the Joseph Rattican murder. He was shot dead in a pub in Newmarket Square in 2004. John Rose, 25, was a suspect in the Warren hit, and he was shot dead as he walked to his apartment in March 2005. There were 3 killings in 2 days in November 2005. Both men were associated to the Thompson faction. In August 2006, Wayne Sambra, 21 years old, was shot dead in Cameron Street, and a month later Gary Bryan was shot dead as he worked on a car outside his girlfriend's house in Walkinstown. Both men were part of the Ratican faction. 3 months later, in December 2006, Eddie McCabe, 21, was tortured and beaten to death after he was abducted by Ratican gang members, and his mutilated body was dumped in the lane. In October 2007, Brian Downs and Edward Ward were shot outside a car dealership. Edward Ward had no connection to the feud, and he was an innocent victim. There were no convictions for his murder. And Shay O'Byrne, 27 years old, was shot dead in front of his girlfriend, who is Brian Ratican's sister, by unmasked gunmen in Tala in March 2009. There was a grenade attack on the home of a Thompson gang member in June 2008, and despite extensive damage to the front of the house, there were no injuries. In July 2009, Anthony Cannon, 26 years old, from Robert Street in the south of the city, was shot several times in the head in front of women and children in the Ballyfermont area of West Dublin. His killer escaped on a motorcycle with an accomplice, and Cannon was a senior member of the Ratican gang, and he was wearing a bulletproof vest at the time, very similar to Philip Finnegan. Brian Ratican was convicted of murdering Declan Gavin after a trial in 2009. He was sentenced to life in prison to add to the 13 years for shooting at the police in 2003. There was another 2 shootings in 2012 that made the police believe this wasn't over. In 2013, Brian Ratican was convicted again while he was in prison and given an additional 17 years because he was linked to 5 kilos of heroin that was found in a house in the Walkinstown area. And Freddie Thompson, the leader of the rival faction, was jailed for murder in 2018. He was sentenced to life for organising the murder of David Douglas in relation to the Hutch Kinahan feud. So because Philip Finnegan was connected to Brian Ratican and so many people were killed in similar ways to how Philip was, this was part of the defence that Stephen used to try to get away with murder. But this didn't work and he was found guilty of the murder. It took a jury 5 hours and 45 minutes to convict him, and the judge said that he will get a mandatory life sentence. And he will be sentenced on December the 13th, 2021. This story definitely shows the dangers of the choices that you make in life and the long-lasting effects of the decisions that you do make. Sadly, this resulted in Philip Finnegan losing his life, and in such a horrific way as well. So I really appreciate you joining me today. Please don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. I'll be back again very shortly with some more news. Peace.